Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee for 2025. We've got apologies this morning from our convener Colette Stevenson and from Michael Mara. Agenda item 1 is decision to take business in private, and we'll seek members' permission to take items 3 and item 4 in private. Are we agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 2 is our final evidence session on pre-budget scrutiny. And I welcome to the meeting Shirley-Anne Somerville, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, who is joined by her team of officials, Julie Humphreys, Director, Tackling Child Poverty and Social Justice, James Wallace, Deputy Director, Social Justice Finance Lead, and Ian Davidson, Deputy Director, Social Security Policy. So thank you, Cabinet Secretary and your team, for joining us this morning. I believe you've got a brief opening statement before we move to questions.
And good morning, committee. It's always a pleasure to be able to take part in the committee's pre-budget scrutiny period. Let me begin by reiterating a fundamental point that I made at the Finance and Public Audit Committee last Tuesday, and that's that investment that we are very proud to be making in the people of Scotland through our social security expenditure is absolutely essential. It's essential to tackle the worst impacts of UK government cuts, essential to tackle inequality and child poverty, and essential as well to provide vital assistance to enable older people to heat their homes, to help disabled people live independent lives, and essential help for Scotland's unpaid carers, who provide such vital support to those they care for, and in doing so contribute over £13 billion to the Scottish economy. And every single pillar of that investment package directly results, of course, from the bold and the deliberate policy choices proposed by this government and supported by Parliament and founded on the unanimously passed 2018 Social Security Scotland Act. The impact of that spending includes keeping 40,000 children out of relative poverty this year through our investment in the Scottish Child Payment alone, which stakeholders across the UK are urgently calling on the UK Government to match. Just a fortnight ago, the Children and Young People's Commissioners for Wales and Northern Ireland were speaking about this at the House of Commons Work and Pensions Committee, with the Commissioner for Wales stating that matching the Scottish Child Payment, and I quote, would be one of the most effective ways of getting money right to the places where it is needed most. Meanwhile, the Scottish Government modelling estimates that our action to mitigate the pernicious two-child limit will result in 20,000 fewer children living in relative poverty in 26-27 compared to if the cap had not been mitigated. One of the key points here is that investment today to mitigate the harmful effects of poverty can lead to reduced demand for and expenditure on a wide range of other public services, such as healthcare, and it can lead to improved productivity through a healthier workforce and greater participation by reducing labour market barriers, particularly for disadvantaged groups. To put that another way, convener, as Emma Jackson of Citizens Advice Scotland said in May here at this committee, the cost of not mitigating damaging UK government policies would be, and I quote, astronomical, and the long-term impacts would last for generations. While we have set up a social security system which is intentionally fair, and are proud to have done so, it is also robust, with applications assessed thoroughly so that those who are not eligible for support don't get it, but those who are eligible do, and all our benefits are subject to rigorous evaluation to test whether they are working as expected. In 25-26, we are investing £1.2 billion more than the block grant adjustments we are forecast to receive from the UK Government for social security. £649 million of that is to mitigate the worst impacts of the UK Government measures, such as the bedroom tax and the benefit cap, as well as addressing the totally inadequate standard of living provided by universal credit, which we've established the Scottish Child Payment to help combat. This investment is possible precisely because we've balanced our budget every year, despite what has now been more than a decade of welfare cuts from successive UK governments. We do recognise the fiscal challenges facing the public finances, and we have a clear strategy and plan in place to ensure the public finances are on a sustainable path, including through actions set out in the medium-term financial strategy and fiscal sustainability delivery plan. And I think it's important here to emphasise that the proportion of the resource budget which the Scottish Government has chosen to invest in enhancing social security in Scotland compared to England and Wales is projected to increase by less than 1% by 2930 compared to this current financial year. That provides the context in which to view the latest Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts, based on which the Scottish Government anticipates to spend around £8.8 billion on social security assistance by 2930. In 25-26, our spending will support around 2 million people, 1 in 3 of the population. And those, therefore, who think our spending should be reduced, I would welcome to take part in the future budget discussions which myself and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance will be hosting, that will help us determine which groups among those 2 million people they would like to see help removed from. The First Minister said earlier this year that our decision to invest in Scotland's social security safety net to target help at those who need it most reflects the values that are fundamental to who we are as a nation. I couldn't agree more, Convener, and that's exactly because of those shared values that we're intent in delivering this vital investment through social security benefits on behalf of so many people and families in Scotland. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I wonder if I could start by just asking about the language used around social security spend, because depending on who discusses it, we talk about an overspend, we talk about a black hole, or we talk about an investment, or we talk about planned expenditure by the Scottish Government and Social Security Scotland. And that language is quite important. Do you consider there to be an overspend within the social security budget, Cabinet Secretary, or do you believe it's planned expenditure beyond what would have been spent anyway had we just followed Westminster's policy agenda? Because I think language is quite important when we talk about these budgets. So could you comment on that, please?
So the language is very important. It's not just important as we sit in committee here in this Parliament, but it's important for the people that we're there to support. I'm particularly minded of a round table I had recently with disabled people's organisations and others who talked about their worry that the stigma that we had hoped to take away from the social security system up here in Scotland, I'm afraid, is coming back because of the language that's being used, particularly when it was connected to some of the most recent UK government welfare changes, some of which have been scrapped, others which have been ongoing. So the language makes a real difference to people in terms of how they feel about themselves and how they feel that they are perceived by others. I do think this is investment. I've set out in my introductory remarks some of the ways in which the investment that we make in social security moves directly into people's pockets to support them to get out of poverty or to stay out of poverty. But it's also an investment to ensure that we're not having to spend the money elsewhere within our public services. And again, this is about proactive decisions, decisions which I have sat in front of committee for. Every SSI, every eligibility SSI that we've discussed and debated. There are exceptionally few examples for all of those secondary legislation where anyone has dissented and voted against. So these are areas where we have came to committee, to Parliament with the eligibility, and Parliament has voted on them.
Okay, I think that's helpful. It's worth putting on the record that the near £500 million a year in Scottish Shell payment is not an overspend, that's planned expenditure.
Yep.
Now, of course, if the planned expenditure was to mean that you were spending £600 million on that, then the forecast would have been accurate and that might be seen as an overspend, but this is all planned expenditure. The reason I'm stressing that point, Cabinet Secretary, is because, and I get politicians and others don't see what their alternative choices are, but if we're making that planned expenditure in the Scottish Child payment or planned expenditure of £649 million to mitigate the worst decisions of Westminster, those are pounds and pence that we're not spending in other things. And some of the narrative we've heard from some of the witnesses so far is if other things are not invested in that also supports children and families and the most vulnerable, be that classroom assistance or health and social care support, then that could also have a detrimental impact on the life experience of people that might otherwise then have to rely on the social security safety net and that investment. So I suppose the question, Cabinet Secretary, is when that planned investment is made into social security budgets, do you look at the relationship between other budgets that could otherwise have more investment and could also help the same people that Social Security Scotland budget spend? Because that was a theme that came up time and again during our pre-budget scrutiny.
Thanks, Kavira. You mentioned forecasts there, and I think it's a very important aspect to recognise that, of course, the budgets that we have are based on the Fiscal Commission forecasts, and we work very closely with the Fiscal Commission as they look at the assumptions for the forecasts that they produce. It is exceptionally challenging to forecast demand-led budgets, particularly for new benefits, but the level of error in forecasting is reasonably small. But you're quite right to point out to that. When it comes to the wider aspects of how to tackle child poverty in particular, clearly there are different ways of doing that. As you mentioned, Convener, overall, I think we spend £3 billion approximately this financial year to assist those on low income and to assist with the cost of living crisis, which is impacting on many families. That's the investment we make, and social security is but one part of that. So if we look at the work on the child poverty delivery plan, and indeed we're just going through the drafting of the next one, we will look at different policies from different parts of government and work out what the impact is, then what the best way to spend that money on. But if I could perhaps bring Julie in on that point just to expand on that a little bit further.
Great, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning, Committee. I think the key thing to think about is the three drivers of poverty reduction and the level of investment that's made across those. And those three drivers are income from employment, the cost of living, and income from social security and benefits in kind. And if you look at Best Start Bright Futures, the balance of those investments across those three poverty drivers is incredibly important, and that leads to the cumulative impact that we then see in terms of the number of children being kept out of poverty. So if you think about parental employment support or Fair Work or the Extra Time programme in terms of helping increasing incomes, cost of living, you look at the affordable housing support, the baby box, the cost of living guarantee, free bus travel, and then, of course, with social security. So it is about the blend of options and working out what makes the biggest impact, the most number of children and parents across Scotland that drives our decision making.
Okay, so I suppose I'm hearing, thank you, Julie Humphreys, we're hearing it's about balance. Julie said blend, it's about getting the balance right. Okay, so my final question, and just my final question, I'll bring Marie in for a supplementary, it's been drawn to my attention there, Marie, is that I had mentioned in your £500 million on the Scottish Child Payment, and had mentioned £649 million to mitigate Westminster decisions. So that's cash in the system at play. This is pre-budget scrutiny. Have any of the parties in this place suggested that we should divert that £500 million from the Scottish Child Payment, or a portion of it, or we should divert that £649 million or a portion of it to other endeavours rather than the planned investment the Scottish Government currently has for those funds?
So the budget discussions have not provided myself, and as far as I'm aware, CabSec Finance, with any details yet from any other party about what changes they would like to make on social security, whether it's about the mitigation measures or otherwise. We still very much are at the foothills of that discussions, and my door remains open to that. Clearly, there are some areas where the expenditure that we have to provide as the Scottish Government, when we're looking at the fiscal sustainability of social security, clearly one of the ways where money could be freed up, if you like, Convener, is if we didn't actually have to do the UK Government's job for them. So if they were to mitigate against the two-child limit, and I notice some press activities to suggest that they may be coming to that decision, then clearly the First Minister has already said that we would be able to reinvest that money that we plan to spend mitigating the two-child limit on other anti-poverty measures. Imagine what we could do if the UK Government also took away at source the bedroom tax, which we currently spend another £80 million on. I could go on about the different mitigating measures. Those are the ones where we could free up money and allow the Scottish Government to be able to invest that elsewhere.
Okay, I know Cabinet said the budget negotiations are private, but I think this committee would be very interested to know if there were suggestions made to nibble away at that investment from Social Security Scotland. So I just put that on the record. Marie McNair, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Camilla. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I was just going back to the budget. Obviously, you know, with all the noise going on about the budget, have you received any representations from MD calling from the policies to be reversed? I mean, obviously, just anyone, obviously, in terms of, not necessarily in this room, but have you received any at all?
No, I think one of the areas where, even if I fundamentally disagreed with the proposals that were coming forward, if we want to move past this back and forth about a critique of the government social security expenditure being unaffordable or unsustainable, then the answers must come back about what policies people want to see changed to allow that trajectory to change, because it is based on eligibility. Now, I may fundamentally disagree with the suggestions that come up, but at least that would move us past the type of discussion that we're on at the moment, which I don't think takes us very far. But that's exactly why we've set out our proposals in the MTFS and the FSDB about how we're proposing to look at that financial sustainability work. It's for others to come up with other suggestions. My door's always open.
But no one's asking for it to be reserved?
At this point, no.
Reverse, sorry. Get my teeth in. Cheers.
Thank you. We'll move on. Elena Whittam.
Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I want to spend a little bit of time about understanding the evidence of impact as assessed by the Scottish Government. So I'm wondering what the Scottish Government's strategy is for assessing the long-term impact of their additional spend on social security. I mean, we know that modelling done by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is going to estimate that child poverty rates as modelled in 2030-31 will be 3% lower than perhaps they otherwise would have been. So could you talk a little bit to how the Scottish Government's assessing the impact?
So there's a number of different layers to that, if you like, and we could start off with the evaluation of the benefits that we've undertaken to date. So there's been 14 evaluations across disability and the 5 family payments, for example. The disability evaluation shows that we've reduced the barriers to applying for benefits through improving support and changes to the application process, which I hope committee would find is a welcome change. And the 5 family payments evaluation, it has demonstrated as a significant positive impact, and the investment we're making will assist in mitigating the most harmful effects of poverty. So we've seen an ability for us to be able to provide for people both in and out of work, because we have, as committee knows, a large number of people with in-work poverty. We've got the evidence that shows the Scottish Child Payment is reducing poverty, positively contributing to reducing financial pressures on households, reducing debt, material deprivation and food insecurity. We have the work undertaken through the Scottish Government and the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which indicates that changes made to the tax and welfare system in previous budgets has contributed to reducing inequality and targeting financial support to those who need it most. The report points to social security benefits promoting equality for women, disabled people and ethnic minorities because they experience higher rates of poverty. We're seeing improving health outcomes from the early evaluation of the Scottish Child Payment, Best Start Foods and Best Start grants through enabling parents to provide more and better quality food for their children. And there's some work that's also been taken by Professor Linda Bald, which has looked at the impact, which again has showed a very positive evaluation as to the impact of social security.
Thanks for that. Audit Scotland published their audit of ADP in September, and one of the recommendations from that is that Scottish Government should include regular reporting on how ADP spending is working alongside other spending to support disabled people and what difference it's making. So making those linkages, is that something that the Government's thinking about to further evidence how that spending is sitting with other spend to improve lives?
I think it is a very important aspect for the Government to look at. I mean, clearly we also have the evidence which comes from DPOs themselves, and this came through loud and clear, not actually because of changes we were looking to make in ADP, but the concern that those DPOs were having about changes that the UK Government were due to make, and they spoke very clearly about the impact that taking away a disability payment could have on actually reducing the ability for disabled people to get into employment or stay in employment. But when it comes to what the Scottish Government is undertaking, Professor Linda Bald again is already looking at some research on these types of expenditure within the Government on ADP, and it is something which I think does require further investigation and support, not just to be able to demonstrate the impact that it's making, but also, I think, to be able to ensure that we have a positive narrative, and it goes back to the convener's first question, a positive narrative about why this is an investment in the people of Scotland, and one which we should be proud of making, rather than seeing it being chipped away as it appears to be doing elsewhere in the UK.
Thank you. And something that we did hear was about the fact that sometimes there's missing data and there's perhaps data linkages that could happen. So there was an assertion that Social Security Scotland data, HMRC data and data from the DWP itself could possibly be linked to show a wider evidence base for the decisions that are made on social security spending. Is that something that the Scottish Government's looking at?
Well, looking at and acting upon, I was actually in a workshop with the Chief Statistician yesterday when the First Minister and I were at the Whole Family Support event, and it was looking at the work that the Chief Statistician has taken forward to ensure that the Scottish Government can have access to DWP data to allow us to be able to drill into that type of information, to provide further evidential support, to provide further information, and also to help in future policy development. So we'd be happy to provide further details of the work that the Chief Statistician has already undertaken, and I know that there are a number of other projects that are currently being worked on, where we are having to, of course, work with the DWP and HMRC to be able to get that data, but both governments are working on that and can provide further information about what we're doing to support that evaluation in an evidential base, and that will help us with policy formation in the future.
I think that would be really welcome by the committee. Finally, from myself, I want to speak a little bit about the evaluation of the 5 family payments, including the Scottish Child Payment. Now, that evaluation showed that 29% of people said it had a major impact on their ability to either stop work and work fewer hours, or stay in work and work more hours, or help them to actually be able to start looking for work and gain employment. Now, there's been some concern raised about those individuals who perhaps start to reduce their hours because it's enabled them to do that. Has the Scottish Government made any evaluation on that, or are you concerned about that, or do you feel as if that adds to a family's ability to make choices themselves?
So I think what's important is we look at the figures in the round, and 69% of clients who responded said that SCP had no impact on their decisions about employment, or it was not applicable. But for the 29% who reported an impact, the most common impact was it was actually helping them with work costs such as travelling or clothing, followed by enabling them to stay in work or work more hours. So it's very important to look at how this has helped people to actually either get an employment, stay in employment, or increase their hours. But the analysis that's been published by the Scottish Government in 2024 did conclude that the payment isn't negatively affecting labour market outcomes at scale at the current levels. Now, clearly that's something, and I know people ask us to increase the Scottish Child payment as well as the budgetary impact for the Scottish Government on that. We would, of course, look at any impact that that may or may not have on the labour market outcomes. That's an important aspect of it. But certainly at this point, it does look like it is in the main either having no impact or actually having a very positive impact on families to be able to make choices about being able to stay in employment.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Thanks, Convener.
Can I bring Marie McNair in?
Cabinet Secretary, I kind of noted from the SPICE report a case where someone who's in employment on a universal credit fears that the harsh earning tapers will end entitlement to the Scottish Child payment. Do you share my concern when looking at other ways to take people out of poverty, including employment, that universal credit isn't fit for purpose?
So the analysis which I've just referred to pointed to the evidence on the labour market impact of a cliff edge wouldn't appear to support a compelling policy rationale for implementing a trigger. I think that's an important aspect of that evaluation. Even if people did wish to see a taper into that, they then need to think about how that would be done, and clearly that cannot be done with the processes we have at the moment. And therefore would require new systems within social security. And again, when it comes to aspects where people are asking, I'm not suggesting Mary McNair's suggesting this for all benefits or indeed this benefit, but it ties into the question she'd asked. We have people saying that we should look at people's incomes, for example, and we should have more means testing, and we should taper, or we should look at ways of further targeting. That clearly then requires information we don't have at the moment, because we don't collect people's income data. We don't need it at this point. If we did, that would have to then be collected and analysed, has an impact on how complex that data, that process is, and therefore the cost of that. So all of these aspects, as well as the impact on individuals, we need to think of the impact on the cost of delivering a system, which would include tapers or an analysis of anybody's income.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I just check? 'Cause I think both Marie and Elena Whittam have spoken about the cliff edge concerns potentially in the future, particularly if Scottish Child payment becomes much higher. There's a kind of tipping point in the labour market impact. A taper is obviously one way to try and mitigate against that once universal credit entitlement is ended. There's also the idea of a run-on for a number of months, which is a wee bit different from a taper. Not all cost money, so I'm not asking you to commit to any of that, Cabinet Secretary, but are these things in the round that the Scottish Government looks at if you like, to future-proof the direction of travel for these policies?
So if you're looking at, for example, a run-on as well as the cost, which you're quite right to point out, Convener, before I did, but the aspects around that, we have to bear in mind that the legislative foundation of the Scottish Child payment is that you are eligible for universal credit. If you are not eligible for universal credit, you are not eligible for the Scottish Child payment because of the way that the legislation is developed. And we developed that foundation because it was the quickest way to deliver the Scottish Child payment. So any changes like that would have to take advantage of the legislation that a committee assisted with the scrutiny of about changing that legislative basis for the Scottish Child payment. Once that was done, you could then look at changes which would allow you to do that, but it's not possible under the current system.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and to your team. I wonder if I can just follow up on that question. I think I'm right in saying, I'm just looking to get it on the record, that at the moment we have no way of knowing those who are in receipt of ADP, which I am, what their income is and how much they are earning. Neither you or the DWP hold that information. Is that correct?
So the DWP wouldn't hold it for PIP, and we don't hold it for ADP because it's not part of the application process because it's not means tested, so we wouldn't collect the information.
Okay, that's helpful. If I can move on, the Scottish Government, you are introducing lots of new spending, investment, as you like to call it, which I think is good. Winter heating, care, additional person payment, and the two-child limit payment. But I'm just wondering, you know, you could have chosen other areas. Why, in your analysis, is that where the money is best invested in the coming future?
So if we look at winter heating payment, I think it would be fair to say there's been a fair level of scrutiny and discussion around winter heating payments and how that should be done. I don't think it's going too far to say I think there is a common consensus that there should be winter heating payments for pensioners. I think we're all agreed on that. I hope we are, but you never know these days. But if we agree with that premise, it's then which pensioners should be able to receive that benefit. And clearly the government has proposed targeting the spend to those in the lowest income. When it comes to carers' additional person payment, this is a long-standing commitment that the government's made. Committee, we've discussed this at various points, well versed in the fact that there are a number of carers living in poverty, and carers' organisations have great concerns about the fact that the current system does not reflect the additional burden which people face if they care for more than one person. And the two-child limit, again, this goes down to the impact this will make on child poverty. The IFS, for example, said just last October that the single most cost-effective policy for reducing the number of children living below the poverty line is removing the two-child limit. And they are by far not the only organisation, charity, think tank that would point to that impact. So that's why those decisions have been taken.
And if the Cabinet Secretary of Finance came to you and said, here's an extra 20, 40, 50 million that I've found under the couch, what would be your next priorities in spending?
In that exceptionally hypothetical situation that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance came and had that discussion with me, I think the type of discussion she would be having was how to spend the finances that the Scottish Government has to make the most impact. And do you think that's on Social Security, Cabinet Secretary, or do you think it would be on elsewhere? Given I am also responsible for the Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, I also have responsibility for equalities as well as Social Security. I'm sure myself and CabSec Finance would get into a discussion about where the maximum impact would be and whether that would be in Social Security or elsewhere.
An excellent political answer. If I can move on, we've taken some evidence and heard others over a period of time in regard to Scottish child payment that perhaps a greater proportion should be targeted at certain groups. So, for example, I think we've had a submission that those who are kind of born 0 to 1 maybe need more support than, say, someone who's slightly older. Have you done any more thinking about targeting the child payment, particularly at certain age groups or other factors involved?
Well, clearly, as part of the discussions that we are having as we develop the budget for this year, it's not only the submissions from other parties, or indeed those in no party, Mr Balfour, that I would welcome to receive on these issues, but also from a number of organisations. And you point to some of the work on the 0 to 1, Save the Children, for example, I know have submitted evidence and discussion on that aspect. We have other calls from other organisations, again, how to make changes in social security and indeed out with social security. And the reassurance I would give to all those organisations is I do take those calls very, very seriously. Clearly, committee will not be surprised that if I totalled up the amount that people wish us to spend on social security and all other aspects of even my portfolio, never mind what's in other people's, then that is not possible. But we do take the calls very seriously, and we do look to see what our response to those would be, and to see whether there's ways that we can spend the money that we do already spend, not just within social security, but in other aspects more effectively.
Thank you. One of my personal frustrations at the moment is that none of us seem to be willing to talk about the difference between universal and targeted payments, and it seems to be a subject that very few politicians want to talk about. But in regard to benefits, how do you come to a view on which benefits should be universal and which benefits should be targeted? And is there any thinking, not necessarily short term but longer term, of whether we've got that balance right between universal and targeting?
Yeah, I think I'm not here to speak on behalf of Liz Smith, but I will say Liz Smith continuously probes on this issue as well. So she is particularly astute on the challenges that she's put to government on that, as you have been, Mr Balfour, for some time. As I've said in the past, the government has a range of different policies, some of which are universal, some of which are targeted. I would say at the outset, all of social security expenditure is targeted. People may wish it to be targeted at different people or targeted in a different way, but the social security expenditure is targeted. The universal services we have, I think, are a very important part of the government's commitment on our social contract with the people. We do have a more progressive tax system here in Scotland, and if we are to do so, then I think it's important that within that social contract, such as aspects around the concessionary travel scheme, free prescriptions and free tuition are an important part of that social contract. Others may have different views on that, but that's certainly the position of the government. We've also been very clear that we do not plan to take away entitlement from people. And again, that's, I think, an important reassurance, because while we talk about people very often, quite rightly, in this committee that are in poverty or that we're trying to keep out of poverty, I'm also very conscious that many of our constituents, while not in poverty, are still being impacted by a cost of living crisis. And the government has a responsibility to those people as well. When we look at how we target, we do obviously look at the impact of our social security expenditure, and we look at the impact that that has on particular groups. Again, if people wish to see different proposals come forward, then I say again, my door is open to that. But I've laid out the principle of where the government stands, both on universalism and the importance of targeting in certain areas.
Thank you, and thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I should put on record, I think budget time must be just around the corner, because that's the first reference to the Finance Secretary's sofa I think we've had during these evidence sessions. So well done, Mr Balfour, in relation to that. Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. We already know that there's an increase in the number of individuals who are receiving disability benefits. So it would be quite good to get a clear understanding from the Scottish Government what it's doing and what the drivers are behind that increased number of people receiving disability benefits, and how that work is helping to inform policy.
So we do undertake that work, and as I alluded to earlier, the Scottish Fiscal Commission's forecasting for disability and indeed other benefits is based on a number of assumptions about the growth and reasons for expenditure. So when we're looking at the Fiscal Commission's increase in their forecast to the end of the decade. In the main, that's due to factors coming across the UK, which I'm sure won't be surprising to committee. So we're looking at the increasing demand for carer and disability benefits, the impacts of the increased cost of living crisis, and the rises in payments due to uprating. So those are some of the reasons behind that work. Scottish Government's also undertaken work to identify the different drivers of demand for devolved disability benefits in Scotland, and it's our intention to publish this analysis in autumn 2025. But what we do know, for example, at this point, is that some of the reasons why we have an increasing demand that's particularly based in Scotland is because we have developed a system where we encourage people to take up support and where there is less stigma. So those are some of the reasons why there's a further increase in Scotland than is anticipated in the rest of the UK. But when we're looking at the rest of the UK, there is an impact on the number of claims that are now being received to do with mental health or behavioural conditions. And those are some of the underlying issues that underpin the assumptions that's within the Scottish Fiscal Commission's work and also the work that the Government has been undertaking.
And you've touched on the sort of underlying issues there. And the Scottish Government policy aimed at improving health in the population is very much one of your priorities as well as a government. And that going hand in hand with what you're trying to do when it comes to social security. And so having that support mechanism that you're trying to put together will help the number of people through the disability benefit process. But it's trying to work out, Cabinet Secretary, if policies that are being pursued by the government to try and improve health and health equalities within the population, what kind of knock-on effects is that having to ensure that we then do have the drivers that are seeing the increases in some of the benefits being claimed?
So an important point, obviously, is that the devolved disability assessment isn't linked to employment. So you may have, indeed we have many people who are in receipt of ADP that are in employment and indeed feel that ADP is what allows them to stay in employment because of the additional support. But I'll bring in Julie on this aspect as well.
Great, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. So you'll be aware that the Scottish Government co-published with COSLA the Population Health Framework recently, and that sets out 5 interconnected drivers of health and wellbeing prevention, which are very closely linked to the drivers of poverty reduction. And I think it's worth thinking about the preventative spend in this space to really support people into employment and keep them healthy and well. And those 5 prevention drivers are prevention-focused systems, social and economic factors, places and communities, enabling healthy living and equitable access to health and care. Now, within that population framework, there is a huge amount of information in terms of the policy interventions, and we can certainly write to committee with further details. I could bore you with it for hours, but there's something really important there around the connectivity and, again, the cumulative impact of the data and the evidence and how that links really clearly into our child poverty programme, because if you aren't healthy, you won't be able to go into employment and take up the opportunities that are available to you, even with the support that is available at the moment.
And you've touched on today about there's been an increase in mental health inequalities, and that's obviously having a detrimental effect on some people who are not getting back into the work environment because of that disability that they've now found themselves under the mental health processes. Are there any drivers that you're looking at specifically to tackle some of that issue, to ensure that people get the support mechanisms behind it that can get them through that process and get them back into the employment situation and progressing that?
Well, I think one of the important aspects of this, again, I will come back to, is that many people that are applying due to a mental health condition or behavioural conditions are already in employment. One of the reasons why we've seen an increase in people coming forward for ADP, for example, because of mental health or neurodiversity and so on, is because we are actually increasing the support for those people to be able to come forward for something for which they've always been entitled to, but never felt that they could apply for because of the stigma or the judgment. So the fact that we have a system that encourages people to apply for benefits that they are entitled to is really important, about taking the stigma away. So the work that is being done overall, not just by government but in society, where we have a much more open discussion around mental health, is a particularly important part. I would also point out for those that are not in employment, that's exactly why we need to have very supportive employability schemes to allow those to people to be supported back into the labour market. So social security, again, is one aspect to it, but employability schemes that support and wrap around a person is also particularly important, and very recently announced the additional investment that the Scottish Government is undertaking to ensure that employability support that's particularly supportive of disabled people is available right across Scotland. So that's the employability linking in with the social security to ensure that that support is provided for those who can get back into the labour market or who wish to but don't have the ability at this time.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Alexander. Carol Walken.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the evidence so far, Cabinet Secretary. I want to just touch on some of the evidence we received from witnesses. I'm sure you'll be familiar with it when we were talking about an increase in the need for spending, sort of further social security spending in the future. And some of our witnesses talked about the fact that to make the difference that you are so committed to, we would need to look at that. And of course, how within the devolved Parliament do we fund that? They talked about some of the taxation. So I wonder if I could ask, the committee has heard calls for substantial extra investment in social security, and that there is scope to fund this through the tax system. And I just wondered if the Cabinet Secretary had a response to some of the points that we'd heard over the evidence sessions.
So I have looked at that evidence, and it, again, further, I think it reiterates the points that many organisations have made to the Scottish Government and directly to CabSec Finance about their desire to see changes in the tax system up in Scotland. What I would say, I think I pointed to this earlier, is around the decisions the Scottish Government's already taken on income tax since devolution that are different from the current UK setup, and that's estimated to raise up to £1.7 billion in additional income in 25-26 when compared to if we had implemented the same rates and bands as the rest of the UK. So I think that demonstrates that the Scottish Government is willing to look at, and indeed has implemented, a more progressive and ambitious taxation system. Again, the First Minister has set out, and the CabSec Finance has set out in Scotland's tax strategy, our next steps in approach to taxes. We think it's very important that tax payers and particularly businesses have some knowledge and confidence in what will happen. So that's why we're providing stability on income tax for the remainder of this Parliament, and that there is no intention to increase the number of bands or rates of Scottish income tax. Clearly, as I've said, without sounding too repetitive, if committee will forgive me, but I'm sure there will be discussions where proposals will come forward on other changes that could be made, but the government's been very clear on that Scottish tax strategy, and some of the points where we felt it was important to be able to provide taxpayers and businesses during the cost of living crisis, with some certainty for the remainder of the Parliament.
Thank you for that reply. One of the other things that the stakeholders raised was around disability and carers benefit, and that they don't adequately reflect the extra cost, obviously, of being disabled, or the value of the economy, you know, to unpaid carers. It's spoken about a lot in the Parliament. So I suppose I'm interested to know if the Government, Cabinet Secretary and our team have looked at the long-term, you know, costs of this, and should we be seeking to find the money for that, or have the team looked at other things that need to be done? You know, does this need to be done differently to support that group?
So it's very important that we do listen to stakeholders about their asks of the government to go further, whether it's on social security policy or elsewhere. I'm very conscious of the support that social security provides. We discussed earlier the impact that has both for disabled people, carers, those in low incomes, in assisting them and supporting them. So given everything I've said at the start of the evidence session, I absolutely recognise the impact that investment has had, and I recognise the calls for us to go further. This then comes down to the decisions that the government will have to take, not just looking at the calls on us to increase social security payments for people, but also the additional asks that are coming in from government. That's the calls that come from, I think, all political parties, is for us to look in the round at our expenditure and to assess whether additional expenditure on social security would be the best way to support an individual or a group of people, or whether it would be an investment elsewhere, or indeed a change of policy elsewhere. But those are the types of discussions that we will be having during the budget, to ensure that we're spending the money effectively, because I do take very seriously the quite right challenge that's put to government around the fiscal sustainability of our plans. But that's exactly why we have the MTFS there, to look at those, because we have additional asks of what government, what people want government to do, but we also have a challenge that we must balance that budget.
Thank you, Convener.
Thanks. I think Jeremy Balfour was wanting to come in this section.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to kind of pursue one area. Mr Wallace is sitting here very quietly, so maybe he could help us out. I, as I said previously, transferred very smoothly and thanks to security from PIP to ADP. I then got a letter a few weeks later saying we were going to carry out a review. And then a few weeks later that, I received an 8-page letter which simply said, has your condition changed, yes or no, tick a box. I did ask you, Cabinet Secretary, how much that cost, and we are told Social Security don't keep that cost. It seems to me that a very inefficient system that we're printing 8 pages of letter for something that could be done with a phone call or an email or some other way. I'm just looking, if that is one cost that Social Security is incurring, and we don't actually know how much it is, are we confident that the systems we're using are efficient in regard to financial money that could be used for, you know, other things?
Yeah. I'll bring in James, if he wishes. He, as you'll notice from his title at the start, he is no longer within Social Security Scotland, but has a wider remit to support me in all things budgetary now. But he's well versed still in all things agency, if he wishes to contribute. But what I would say is that we are looking very closely at the ability for the agency to communicate effectively with people. Has 2 benefits. One, it's more cost effective, but 2, it's actually maybe what people would prefer as well. So that clearly needs us to have the right information from individuals. We would never move, for example, the agency would never move from a letter to an email if that's not people's desired preference, because we're always very keen to use the channel that's appropriate. So we are looking, and the agency is already instigating work to move away where supported by client decisions from paper to emails for certain aspects, and we're also keeping a close eye on the impacts of how we communicate and the cost of that. But I don't know if James wants to contribute.
Excuse me, slightly, I'll add slightly, Cabinet Secretary, that value for money was a key component of social security as we set up the systems and processes. And I think it's the points Cabinet Secretary makes is about effectiveness, efficiency and economy, that it's all three together. So although one element of the process may cost more and may appear to cost more than it otherwise might, actually doing it right first time prevents additional costs further down the system. So if you get the wrong information and you make a wrong decision and it leads to appeals, actually it's worse for the client, it's worse in terms of expenditure. But it is a key component of Social Security Scotland systems is value for money, and the SPFM is considered as we build and operate and refine systems as we go.
I mean, I suppose my concern is that we don't know if it's value for money because you don't, well, not you personally, but Social Security Scotland do not know how much it costs. So how do we know it's value for money if Social Security Scotland don't know how much it costs to carry out this procedure?
So we... Sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
What we don't do is analyse every single part of the process and analyse how much each individual staff member costs, because that staff member can move across different benefits and can move across different parts of the system. That's to allow it to be more efficient and effective, rather than everyone sitting in the silos and that you must only do this. And that would be easier for us to measure, but that individual is there not effective, not efficient in terms of the working that we've had. But the agency does look at the impact and how we can save money, if it's right for the client, in terms of changes, and communication with clients is an important part of that. But I don't know if James wants to add.
No, I think that's exactly right, Cabinet Secretary. In a macro sense, we will know exactly what we do know exactly what the agency costs, and we publish annually what the agency costs. And there is disaggregation of the costs within there. I think it's the Cabinet Secretary's point. People work across streams. They don't. You would have to engage in some type of costing that might be quite arbitrary in order to get down into an individual level of what does that individual process for that individual client cost.
Yeah, so that's not what I'm asking. I was asking for total cost of how much it, and my understanding from the Cabinet Secretary is that there's no cost. So we can't put a cost on how much it's costing Social Security Scotland to do these reviews. Or are you saying that information is available?
No, so I think in a macro sense the cost of the agency is available, but reviews is one part of what the agency does. The same individual will also analyse brand new applications for ADP as they come in. They may also be analysing applications for CDP or SCP. So to break it down into that micro, what does this small component of a much larger process cost, it becomes quite... it's about cost allocation, and it can become quite arbitrary, actually.
For example, is how much is spent on mailing.
Yes.
So therefore, we know that the agency has a cost, quite a significant cost attached to how much it costs just to simply mail out to individuals, which is why we're looking at changing the processes, or the agency is looking to change the processes to allow us to have more email traffic, for example. So those areas are analysed, and we recognise that that's a cost that we can make savings on, and indeed the agency's got a process ahead of work, a work stream that's already been undertaken to reduce those costs.
No, I'm done, Convener.
I was just going to say we're getting to a bit of a niche, but important matter there. If Cabinet Secretary of your officials want to let the committee know examples of how you seek to drive appropriate efficiencies within Social Security Scotland, I'm sure that would be welcome. I'm also conscious that when auditing and budgeting for each individual line, there's a cost to that also. So there must be a balance made between how much it will cost to actually get officers or officials to get the cost of something, which could be greater than the cost of something in itself. So any reflections you want to give us in correspondence to driving efficiencies in the agency, I'm sure would be very welcome. We'll move on to Minnie McNair now.
Thanks, Convener. Just want to kind of speak about the changes to Social Security block grant adjustments. And obviously the UK Labour government's proposed PIP cuts until they're screeching U-turn obviously would have impacted negatively on the block grant adjustments. How concerned are you about further changes to policy at a UK level?
So I think we've had an unfortunate run of changes to UK government policy, most importantly for the people that would be impacted for them, and we make clear. But secondly, very much secondary to that is the impact on the ability of the Scottish Government to be able to set a budget. So we've had in-year budget changes in the last year or so around pension age, winter heating payment, which made a significant change to the Scottish Government budget for the financial year of which we were in, and therefore our policies had been set, and we had to change those at pace and in ways that were uncomfortable for the government, but we needed to balance the budget that year. We then have the changes which will come into play that change the block grant adjustments over a longer period of time. The most obvious one to those were the changes that were suggested, proposed for PIP that have been then rolled back on. That does make it challenging. The committee will be under some of the same challenges because clearly the work that was produced by the Scottish Fiscal Commission includes the changes that the UK Government were due to make to the block grant adjustment. And we are having to wait until the next fiscal event from the UK Government to get further information from the OBR to allow the Scottish Fiscal Commission to do further forecasting, and then that assists with the Scottish Government. So there's a lot that does impact on the Scottish Government and our ability to be able to look and forecast into the future about what we will get through BGA and therefore the impact it has on the Scottish Government budget. So it's very difficult to be able to do that when we don't have advanced sight of material. So we have asked the UK Government, I absolutely appreciate they need a private space to be able to make their own decisions, but somehow we need to find a better way of doing that, because we are still at the point where I am reading about it on social media before we've had the courtesy of a call from UK Government. And indeed, I continue to read what may or may not happen on the two-child limit as the agency spends money this financial year to mitigate against the two-child cap. I don't know whether it's speculation what's going to happen. We're already spending money on mitigating the two-child cap. We will deliver that mitigation in March, and we were right to do so. But again, I wait to see what happens, whether there's going to be a change in that or not.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the change, actually. In terms of the discussion, obviously, with the Scottish Government, obviously, I'm kind of interested to hear about that, and obviously spoken about it. What kind of dialogue have you had with Stephen Timms?
So I find the Minister very approachable, very accommodating in the conversations that we've had. It remains to be seen whether that follows through to the Minister then making policy decisions which the Scottish Government would then support. But he is someone who I've had a number of meetings with over a variety of issues. I've discussed the UC review with him and the calls that Scottish Government have made around the 5-week wait, around split payments. We've offered to share with him the work that we've already done on Scottish Choices, for example, on UC, and we remain open and ready to engage with him on the work that he will be doing around disability, disabled benefits as well. I think it would be fair to say, from what I hear from DPOs, and they can well speak from themselves, but what I hear from DPOs is a slight concern again that the Minister's genuine interest and genuine knowledge in this area may not follow through to policy changes which would allow support to disabled people to be increased. That does have potentially an impact on Scottish Government, and I would hope that the Minister would find a way for us to have those types of discussions about impact before he makes decisions rather than after.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary.
I think we've got a supplementary from Carol Mochan.
Mine just, you know, obviously it's quite fortuitous to, we're just talking about the relationship there with the UK Government, and I think I read in the press yesterday that there's going to be a continuation of the employment injury assistance through the DWP. It's not going to be for maybe the next 2 years, and I just wondered if there was a particular reason, a technicality or something that was needing to be followed up.
Yeah, so this is a benefit that has effectively not been changed in 75 years or so by successive UK governments over decades. So we have a massively out-of-date policy that's based on kind of, in effect, heavy industrial injuries. And the consultation that we undertook very recently on this gave the two options about we could effectively lift over that outdated system and put it into Social Security Scotland, or we could ask the DWP to hold that for us at this moment in time as we look to do the policy work that looks at making the benefit fit for purpose. The results came back that there was a preference for us to look at that benefit in a more holistic sense. That will take time because, as I say, it has not been touched for decade upon decade, and that does mean that there's a lot to unpick, but we have a committee that's been established for that, sits out with government, although supported by officials. So that's undertaken that more holistic view at it, given the views of the consultation process. So it will carry on as an agency agreement to ensure those that receive the benefit at the moment continue to receive it.
Great, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Carol. That's us, Cabinet Secretary. We've reached the end of our evidence session. Can I thank yourself and your officials for being here this morning for contributing to our scrutiny, our pre-budget scrutiny. And we now move to agenda item 3, which was previously agreed to take in private. So we now move into private session. Thank you.